Welcome to another episode of the Words to Your Mother podcast, where we talk openly and honestly with the goal of normalizing mental health conversations until even your mom gets it. Today's show is an interview with Lauren Keller on death positivity, which is a topic that doesn't get enough attention in my personal opinion. We chat about death, dying, and answer community questions around being prepared for death. I hope you are able to come away from this with at least one concrete task you can do. I definitely did. And if you do come away with a task, and if you do complete a task, I would love to hear from you. Enjoy. For our lovely guest here today, this is Lauren.
Caca.
I love it.
I'm here.
That's perfect. Caca is that's a perfect one. Nate Hate 346. Hello.
That is my friend Nate. Hi, Nate.
Okay, see, I was thinking it was, we have a good friend named Nate, and he gets a lot of hate, and I was thinking someone had made a troll account for him, and I'm like, nah, we'll just roll with it. That is totally fine. Well, y'all, I am super excited to be here today with Lauren Keller, or Link. Their pronouns are they, them, she, and her, and they're a media psychology PhD student. Her focus is on video games, especially the positive social and emotional outcomes from playing games, which we've talked about a lot here on the show. They're also an advocate of the death positive movement and seeks to reduce stigma around talking about death and dying, which I am so excited to get into tonight. Aside from gathering copious student debt, it's true. Link spends their free time co-hosting podcasts on the Geek Therapy Network and has recently dipped their toes into making video essays. So if you guys haven't followed Chicken Dinosaur on Twitter yet, I'm going to post some links right here. I'm going to hit you right up front with some links. So this is, that's how you spell Chicken Dinosaur right there. And then the Geek Therapy Radio and the Headshots podcast can be found right here. And then this is also which we've talked about Geek Therapy before, but here's their Twitch channel, just in case you're not following them already, which I think everyone here probably is. And if you go to that Twitch link, Geek Therapy has a link to their Discord too. So I am super excited to be talking about death positivity. And first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to be here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually met you in the Geek Therapy Discord, and I am always nervous to reach out to people in Discord. I don't want to feel super stalker-y and be like, I saw you. Will you please come on the show? But I'm really glad this worked out.
Yeah, I was really stoked you sent me that message, and I'm just like, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in.
I never know what kind of response I'm going to get from people. Either no response or like, I don't know. No, I don't think so. or a super excited response. So I'm very glad to have you here. And first question off the bat. Oh, you know what? I got to open the queue first. So sorry. While I am opening this queue, could you just kind of explain to us why you do what you do and sort of what interests you in mental health and how you got into this field?
Yeah, sure. I am currently a media psychology PhD student. So mostly I do studenting.
Like it?
Studenting. I came via psychology as my background. I got my BA in psychology, and I was working on a project for some class for that. And I was complaining about how I couldn't find any positive research on video games. And then my friend was like, well, why don't you do that? And I was like, oh, shit. Okay. I guess that's what I'm going to do. And so then I started applying to PhD programs with the intent of doing video game research. And in that course, somewhere along the line, I ran into Caitlin Doty's YouTube channel, Ask a Mortician, and she introduced me to the idea of death positivity, and I watched all her videos, and then I read all her books, and then I was just like, oh my God, I love this thing so much. I think it's really important, and I want people to talk about it. And I feel the same way about video games. I think they're important and I want people to talk about it. And so I've just sort of smashed them together.
I like it. Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about the kind of supportive aspect of video games, and especially in the face of all of these, media sound bites of, video games cause all these shootings and everything. And it's like, okay, but how is that limited to only the US? Like, where are your facts? And so it's been nice to get from people some of the facts around how video games and tabletop games and all of those things can actually support your mental health and your emotional, mental well-being. So that's, I am really glad that you combine the two, because death positivity is something that also, I think it was Patrick O'Connor, was the first one to bring it up on here and kind of touch on death positivity. And he was talking about in the aspect of sort of the positive psychology. And then he mentioned it in conjunction a little bit with that. And we didn't really get into it. So I'm excited to get into that a little bit more today with you. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. You could almost tie it. This time, this question almost never gets actually tied to anything. And it only came up because our very first mental health professional guest that we had on here brought up her love of certain true crime stories and serial killers and those kinds of things. And so since then, I've asked almost every guest that I've had on here the same question. And that question is, even though it sounds unrelated, and I don't have the leaderboard yet, I'm so sorry, but do you have a favorite serial killer?
It's tough to say favorites, but I did ponder this question for a while, and I sort of narrowed it down to either H.H. Holmes or Albert Fish. Those are the two that I'm just like, when you're up really late and you're like, I can't wait to fall asleep. Here I am. And then that one little thought comes up and you're like, actually, I'm going to stay awake forever. I'm never going to sleep again. Those are the two. Those are the two that do that for me.
Yeah, those are definitely the kinds of questions. Fish actually came up last time too. So that's interesting that he's gotten kind of a second vote there. Hey, Dr. D, how are you doing? All right. So do you watch just true crime in general, or are these just some of the things that maybe they've come up in your studies, or?
It's more just a personal interest. I listen to, several true crime podcasts, and I'll watch, documentaries from time to time. I love the horror genre in general. So I tend to hang out more in the fictional side, but true crime it scratches that itch for me too. So yeah.
Do you have a favorite true crime podcast? 2 in a row. I know, Byron. I know.
I think,
or fictional crime podcast. That's fine too.
I think I like Wine and Crime a lot. I think that one's really funny. It's 3 Minnesotan women get drunk while covering true crime stories on various themes, and they're very like best friends, and it's fun and funny, and they do a really good job of being like, hey, we are not laughing at the murder part. We are laughing at this other stuff. We're just interested in the murder part, and we want to talk about it. And I'm like, heck yeah, me too.
Well, I could get down with the wine part of that for sure. And that sounds like a really fun idea, just drinking some wine and getting a little bit sauced and talking about crime. I think that's fantastic. And I wrote it down also. Yeah. So I'll look it up later. I have my little book of things that I write down, and my reading list since I started doing this has grown, and my podcast list has grown quite a bit.
I bet.
Minnesota rocks. Yeah, Dr. Dias is from Minnesota. So there you go. All right. So can you loosely define death positivity for us?
So what I usually use as my go-to explanation is death positivity is just like sex positivity. It's this movement that's main purpose is to educate people on death and to destigmatize talking about death and dying. And the point is, like sex education, is a lot of people feel really uncomfortable around talking about it, and it gets stigmatized and it becomes taboo to talk about it, and people get confused and, uncomfortable asking to have that confusion straightened out. And so the idea being, if we make it more socially acceptable to talk about these things, then it's, we understand it better and it's less scary to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good, comparison. I mean, because we've talked very briefly about kids and not necessarily sex positivity with younger kids, but just kind of being open to talking about that as a parent and as your kids are growing up. So
yeah, it's not necessarily positivity in the idea of being like, yeah, death is the coolest, right, or everybody should be having sex all the time. It's more like, instead of treating it like something scary and bad that we shouldn't talk about it, we shouldn't think about it, don't bring it up around grandma. Mm-hmm. Oh God. It's like, no, it's normal and it's a part of everybody's life at some point. I mean, even people who don't have sex were probably made from sex. So at least adjacently, sex and death are a part of every human's existence. So we should feel comfortable to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, there's some people hear death positivity and immediately think that you're promoting suicide. And it's like, that's not what this is. Yeah, not at all.
Not at all.
Not even close. Dr. D said one of my favorite jobs was a hospice social worker. Always seems odd to say that. I loved it. So very rewarding. That's interesting, because I had someone else say today on Twitter that they worked in palliative care and that it was really common to talk about death in this kind of open manner in palliative care, which makes sense, right? Because that's, that's kind of on the path there for some people. And it's like, okay, but why can't we bring it even out of that? Like, my grandfather is currently in hospice and dying. Like, that's where he is right now. And he's a retired funeral home director and mortician. And we grew up around that kind of thing. So it was normal. But now that he is the one dying, it's like my whole family has just stopped talking about it. And it's like, why are y'all making this so weird? I mean, he's helped so many people through so many things, and he's seen so many things related. Yes, road trips with bodies in the back, yo, come on. Like those things, we grew up with those being totally normal, and it was fine. And it's like, now no one wants to ask, when exactly is he going to die? No one wants to talk about, well, Grandpa, what do you want at the end of your life? And those kinds of things. It's bizarre to me. The show 6 Feet Under comes to mind. I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Is that a good one? What's that about?
It's an HBO show about a family funeral home, and sort of similar to what you're describing. The father of the house dies, and everybody is like, well, how do we do this now without this person who's been like the tent pole of our entire family?
Yeah.
And also run this business. And then, they get into various drama because it's an HBO show. But I haven't watched all of it. I've only seen a couple of episodes here and there, but I hear it's really good. Yeah. People really like that.
I'm going to have to find somebody's HBO I probably shouldn't say that. To trade. So are there kind of detriments to just not talking about death until someone dies and then just dealing with it on an as needed kind of this hush-hush basis like it commonly is now? Are there downsides to that?
I think that the biggest downside to avoiding talking about death and dying is that when a death happens, you have this entire additional thing to deal with. When you're dealing with a loss, like, that's hard. You're sad, you're angry. Maybe it's somebody who's died after a long sickness, so maybe you feel like joyful that they're finally done, and all of these emotions, and having all of that stuff and needing to support your family and give emotional support to other people who are impacted by this loss. And then on top of all of that, being like, oh, hey, you have to guess what grandpa wanted done with his body. You have to figure out how to find the $6,000 for this funeral arrangement because that's what the funeral director says you need. You have to, and it's all these things that, especially when you get more into the like medical care side, there's so many questions that you may be very suddenly put in this position of having to make a lot of decisions about this person you presumably care deeply for and is now either dying or dead. And the strain of having to make those kinds of decisions on top of the totally normal experience of grief can be devastating to people individually, but it can also break apart entire families. I have seen it where an important figurehead in the family dies and they were basically like the person who kept everybody together. And when they died, everything fell apart. Nobody knew what needed to happen. Everybody had different ideas of what grandma would have wanted and all of this stuff. And it's like, there wasn't any way to ask her. She was already gone. Yeah. And so it's just this big question. A lot of people will end up feeling really guilty. Like no matter what they end up doing, they'll feel guilty because they're like, well, what if I didn't do what they wanted? And those kinds of feelings. Or, maybe like because I had to do that, it impacted my own ability to grieve. And so now I'm like more fucked up about grief in general. And so anytime it comes up, I'm like really like shy about it or whatever. Like all of these things can happen because we're so avoidant of it in the first place that when it becomes a thing, and it's unavoidable, it will happen in your lifetime. And if not, like if by some lucky stance you don't experience loss, well, eventually you will die and your family is going to experience your loss. And so don't you want them to know what you want and not give them that extra burden of, having to decide what to do with your body and what kind of memorial to have and all of those things. It really relieves that kind of burden on your family members. I also think just in general, death is such an integral part of life that if you avoid death, you are cutting off a part of living your life. And that can be really isolating and unhealthy in the long term because at some point you're going to have to face it.
Yeah. No kidding. By Mark said, for the record, donate anything that can help, cremate or whatever. The rest I'm not using anymore. Then throw a party. That's interesting, by Mark, because I've heard a lot of people say, I want you to throw a big party. Like have an open bar and just let everybody drink and, throw a slideshow up there if you have to or if you want to or whatever, but just get together and have a party. That's all I want. And yeah, we kind of like you have a wake and a funeral traditionally around here, and it's sort of, afterwards you go to the church and everybody brings something to eat, and that can turn into sort of a party. But I think that the sentiment behind just communicating that wish of I want it to be a party really alleviates let's all dress in black and be really somber and not share any fun stories until the after part is already done. And you can totally avoid that for someone like Bite Mark, who is saying throw a party. Like that's my sister, by the way. I would feel totally comfortable skipping the wake and just being like, no, let's just get together and have a party. It's not, just throw my body in the trash. I ain't using it. Frank Reynolds, Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Yeah. Well, and I've said before, like, find a way to bury. I don't want to be in a box. Just find a way to bury me somewhere. Like, I don't, if that means cremating and spreading my ashes, fine. But I don't want to be just in a box because my body is of no use to anyone or anything that way. And it's like you can put a headstone somewhere, you can plant a tree, whatever you need to do. Just, there's different ways of doing it. But if I don't communicate that to someone, then no one's going to know that. And they're going to put me in a traditional box. And whether my consciousness continues or not, everyone has different views on that, and that's fine. Whether my consciousness continues or not, like, if I have communicated that to no one, then no one knows. And if my consciousness does continue, then I know, oh, shit, I should have said something.
Oops.
Right.
I should have left a post.
Yeah, right. Yeah. When I'm gone, you can tell all the stories you've been sworn to secrecy on. Ooh, those are the fun ones. That's true.
Oh, you better screenshot that and save it.
I need to.
Everyone.
Yes. I'm gonna start off the day with that. Slay says, throw my ashes over a lake. See, there you go.
Yeah. See, and stuff like that is really cool because everybody has sort of different things that are special to them. Like you're talking about, you don't want to be in a box, and I know for me, I don't want to be embalmed. I think embalming is gross and bad, and I would not like to participate in that at all. Skip me. But then there are things like, traditional cremation, and there's aqua cremation, which is a more carbon footprint friendly way of getting ashes, basically. And then there's all sorts of cool natural burial things that are starting to pick up again, which when you think of like historically of humans existing, natural burial is pretty much the number one way throughout history is like you died and it's like there's dirt here and we're going to put you in it and it's going to be great and it's going to help the environment and everybody's going to be happy and we're going to get drunk and it's going to be great.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like those kinds of things, when you're thinking about what you want done to your own future corpse, like as uncomfortable as that can be to sort of think about, there is something sort of very intimate and personal about like what you want to happen to this flesh container when you're done with it. And so it's like saying that to your friends, and I don't know if Nate is still in the chat, but I have had conversations with him where I'll be like, what do you want done with your future corpse? And I love popping that on people because, sometimes there's the like, ha 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 joke, like, oh, shoot me out of a cannon into space and then like change the subject as fast as you can. But sometimes you get like really thoughtful responses from people and you really get insight to what sorts of things they value. And that can be really, really nice and intimate between people to have that kind of conversation. And also, if you're telling people who conceivably might have control over your future corpse, it's nice for them to know exactly what you want done and they can respect those wishes and feel close to you in that way, that they got to do the thing that you wanted to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point about the connection to your loved one who has died. Like that does provide a connection knowing that you've honored kind of their wishes. Level 3 gaming, welcome, by the way, says burn me, please. All right. Super important to discuss healthcare directives with your family, 18 plus, everyone. Yes, absolutely. When I went to Australia, it was the first time I had put together a will and a medical directive and all that stuff. And I realized at that point, so that was in 2014, I realized at that point I hadn't talked to anybody about any of that. And so I put it in writing and I communicated it to my husband and I communicated it to my dad because, they're like the two most likely to be doing anything with my body, I guess.
Yeah.
And then whenever my great grandfather died, we went up to Oklahoma, which is where he lived and where he died. And the subject came up again, just sitting around learning penny and dime tricks, which was really fun, and playing cards and then talking about what we wanted to have done after we died. It was a really good conversation, but it's like, I wish that wasn't just limited to those kinds of settings. By Mark said, embalming is dumb and bad for the environment. Dr. D said, the plant your ashes in a tree thing, totally cool. Oh, yes. Yes. I love that.
Very cool. I'm also a big fan of the mushroom shroud, where they make either a suit or just a traditional shroud. And they line the fabric with various mushroom spores. And it's like just the right blend where it decomposes your body very quickly. So you become like super rich nutrients, delicious dirt almost immediately, like in 3 or 4 weeks. It's really cool. They also, I ended up looking it up because I thought it was so neat, but they also sell pet
I'm gonna look it up.
So you can get a little mushroom shroud for your pet. And
that's really cool.
I think that's really cool. Yeah.
We have a dog.
Kind of stuff.
We have a dog buried in the backyard, and after we buried her, about a foot away from where we buried her, we planted a peach tree. So we've got a peach tree right there. That. Vimark said, I always thought it'd be kind of cool to have my body donated to a body farm, but I know the logistics of that would be pretty complicated. It's actually, I know how to get that done for you. So there's I think it's UT. My best friend's mom was donated to a body farm, and then they cremate at the end and send the remains. So we can talk about that later, and I can connect you with whoever it is she set it up with. Nate Haight is still here. Slay said, my biggest fear is my desires not being respected. I think that's fair. I mean, that's totally fair. And I'm sure that your loved ones want to make sure that they're respecting your wishes too.
Yes. I mean, hopefully.
Yeah.
I hope that you have a supportive family in that way. Yes. But I do know that there are, especially like trans people having to deal with needing to make sure you have people outside your direct family who actually have legal control over you after you've died. If you want all of your wishes to be followed. I know that there are lots of cases where people get misgendered after death, which is really messed up, and stuff like that, where their wishes aren't respected in the way that they should be. And so it's one of those things that, I mean, obviously I would like to don't worry about it. Everything will work out great. But the truth is we got to think about this stuff. And if you want things to go a certain way, you can't prepare for everything, but this is one of the ways that you can prepare. And it'll help you feel better, and it'll help people around you feel better because they'll know what you want. Yeah,
take the guesswork out of it, kind of.
Yeah,
that's great.
Exactly.
I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want people forced to walk past my open casket because they move it to the entrance before they let anyone leave, so you can't get out without walking past.
Oh, no.
I understand that. I know exactly what you're talking about, where you're coming from. Dr. D said, can I get that mushroom suit with psychedelics? Because then I can take my friends and family on one more hopefully great trip.
That sounds fantastic.
I love it. That's awesome.
You should trademark that.
Yeah, no kidding. That's you'd have to come up with a catchy name for it. Final Trip or something.
That was great.
Something. So how could someone avoid being seen as morbid if they talk about death in the concept of this kind of death positive movement? Because right now, if you bring up death, at work or with friends or something else, you can be seen as really morbid. And to the extent where sometimes people might even say, are you suicidal? And it's like, no, that's not. It's not what this is.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I haven't had very many people call me morbid to my face, but I've definitely had people respond uncomfortably to me in conversation. Not necessarily straight up being like, oh, I'm uncomfortable and turning and leaving or anything. But like I said before, is often humor is the way that we deal with the discomfort of talking about death. Yeah. And so people will just make a little joke and then change the subject to something else. And that's fine. I've found that what I do is just sort of, let the joke go and then circle back around and just sort of gently keep reminding the person that this is something that you want to have a conversation about and that you think it's important to have that conversation. You are going to get resistance. You'll probably experience resistance yourself. I've had conversations with people where you'll get into this is the kind of stuff I want done with my body, but then you sort of don't totally dip down your toes into in the case of brain death. I need you to make sure that they donate all of my organs, or I don't want to be put on a feeding tube ever. So I need you to know that. It's oh, well, I'm not going to get that specific. I'm just going to avoid it a little bit. And it's that's the totally normal resistance that everybody experiences all the time talking about uncomfortable stuff. And I think sort of the main point is be compassionate to yourself and be compassionate to other people who are experiencing that sort of resistance. But remember, it's important and it's something that and that's what you can actually just say. I've said that before to my grandmother when trying to talk about end of life stuff that she wants done, is like, I can see that you're sort of uncomfortable right now, so we can talk about something else, but I want you to know that this is important to me and I'm going to bring it up again sometime soon. And just or when you're comfortable, if you would bring it up with me, that would be really important. And sort of leaving it where it's like, I'm not going to be pushy about it because, you know, I value your comfort and I don't want you to be upset. But I also think that this is important enough. We kind of need to wade through that discomfort anyways. And I want to do that with you. And like I said before, that's one of those things where it's like, it's uncomfortable, but there is something very warm and intimate about having that kind of vulnerable conversation with somebody about being like, hey, I never, ever, ever, ever want to think about my mortality, but I'm going to just open up my like nightmare heart hole and show you like, hey, here's my mortality fear. I would like to share it with you. And then they're like, oh, here's mine. It's nice. Then it's beautiful.
I love that visual. My heart mortality hole. I think that's great. So do you think that people are more afraid of death or of grief?
I think it's hard to separate out the two. And the main reason that is I think people, humans in general, have a really, really, really hard time conceptualizing their own death. Because how everything we experience throughout our whole life, everything that makes up what we are and who we know ourselves to be is through our perceptions and interactions with the world. So how do we conceive of non-existence? And the typical go-to is like, well, what was it like before you were a baby? You don't remember anything and you didn't care then, right? So it's fine. This is just the other side of that. But, you know, obviously we care a lot more because we are now. I am. And so we fear death because that unknown, typical fears also include, you know, the pain of dying, leaving behind loved ones or unfinished business, things that you wanted to get done. There's all sorts of typical fears associated with death. But I think that grief is always tied up into that because we can't really conceive of our own. And so it's always going to be sort of reflected onto other people because that's the one we can experience. We have experienced the loss of other people from our lives, whether that's literally through death or somebody moved away or you just lost their phone number or whatever. It's like we have at least a little bit of a through line to reference there. But with ourselves, it's like, I don't really know how to imagine not existing here in my body, but that's what's going to happen. So yeah. So yeah, I think it's probably pretty personal to the individual person, whether they are more afraid of their own death or if they're more afraid of losing other people through death. But I think that it's a pretty universal fear. Everybody's sort of afraid of not being and also losing the people we love. But I also kind of feel like that is how we make meaning in our lives, is that there is, it is an infinite. It's brief, and that makes it special.
Yeah, if there wasn't an end point, I mean, how is anything you do, how can you make anything you do impactful if there's no end point that because that's kind of a motivation, right? I'm going to die eventually. I need to do what I can, whatever your goals are, do what I can to make the world a better place or, do what I can to make as much money as, whatever your personal goals are before you die. Like that's kind of the piece that the death is what motivates you to get it done now instead of being like, I've got 1,000 years. It's fine. I'll get it done eventually. No.
Yeah.
Holding out for immortal robot body. Look, you have to invent the immortal robot body before you die. That's the goal. Get it done.
Chip, chop, chip. There's a lot of people who want a robot body.
Yep. So how does grief kind of intersect with death positivity? And can death positivity support that grief and healing in some way? Do you feel like it lessens grief or ties in with it somehow?
I think it definitely supports grieving. I'm gonna dive into some personal stuff right here. I just experienced a very close and longtime friend of mine who is my age just died a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very close with her family, and it's been really tough. But I almost immediately realized I've been working on reading a lot of death studies, research in preparation for my dissertation. I'm doing a lot of research stuff right now. So I had checked out 6 books from the library that were all various angles of death and dying. And I literally just finished all of them when I found out that she had died. And I was like, well, I didn't expect to be using this information so soon, but gosh, I really am. And I think that sort of ties into the main idea of educating and destigmatizing. I felt less overwhelmed because I had educated myself on what was happening and what the following steps were and what was normal for people to experience after a loss. And I felt more able to share all of those feelings that I was going through with other people and be open and hold space for other people to share their feelings with me, because I'd already been practicing those kinds of thoughts and feelings in my mind through my research. And so I think that sort of works the same way as in looking at death positivity, the idea of sort of incorporating death a little bit more into your everyday life, something that you talk about with your family, your kids, your parents, your neighbors, your close friends, their kids, that kind of stuff, and just making it a normal conversation that happens. Then when somebody does die, everybody feels a little bit less scared and a little bit less like, I'm completely 100% overwhelmed. I have no idea what to do. Right. How can I possibly go on? Or what am I supposed to even do? I don't know. And instead there can be like, look, that's normal. It's normal to feel that way. And you're not alone. And here's, a simple step that you can take care of right now. Or, here's somebody to contact that that they're going to have your back to take care of that for you. And you don't even have to worry about it. But you wouldn't know any of that stuff if you didn't have those kind of conversations before.
Yeah. I think that's all that is very true. Slay said, one of my many personal pre-death goals, interest fund that basically generates enough money to pay for a lot of the things my children will need in life. Same. Definitely. Yeah. Sniper. Oh, that's the other Nate.
Hi, other Nate.
That's the other Nate. I feel the problem with death is it is something we don't understand, and the problem is we all fear what we don't understand. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Big time.
And Alex has a question. He says, can't death motivation work both ways? The logic, if I focus on the things I need before I die, then I have to come to terms with my mortality, and I don't feel like thinking about that today, maybe tomorrow, but then really winds up being never. That's a good question. So it's kind of, can death motivation work both ways? If you're super afraid of talking about it, you kind of avoid acting on anything related to it, rather than understanding the knowledge that you are going to die and being motivated by that, having that be the end cap, and you're a little bit of your motivator there.
I think so here's the thing. I consider myself a death positive person. I am scared of dying. Like that doesn't go away. I'm afraid of the physical process of dying, though I guess the physical process of death doesn't bother me as much because I won't be there. But the dying part is terrifying to think about, and I'm heartbroken to think about how my friends and family would react to my loss if it was sudden, or if I got seriously terminally ill over time. Like that stuff, I'm not afraid of those things anymore. I just feel like the fear is to a point where I can have it and have it be a part of who I am as a person, and not be something that keeps me from living my life. It makes me more appreciative of every minute that I get, because I've accepted that even though it's scary, the end is coming. And so what I get now, what I get to experience, the people I get to come in contact with, the people I get to talk to, like right now is like, that is such a wonderful, absurd, magical thing. And I feel more grateful in my everyday life because of that. And I think that even if you are an extremely, extremely resistant person to talking about death at all, thinking about death, you don't want to watch scary movies, you don't want to watch anything violent on TV, you're just completely like, I don't want to do that. That's totally understandable, and it's totally normal too. But I still think, just adding just a little sprinkle of a little bit more death and dying and grief conversation will help reduce that fear a little bit, will help you not necessarily feel less afraid, but less alone in your fear. Because I guarantee you, if you open up to somebody about being like, hey, I'm kind of scared about this thing and I don't ever really like thinking about it, but it kind of pops up in back of my head, and I kind of just wanted to say it to you, and people will respond generally pretty well to that stuff. And you'll find a lot of people being like, oh my God, me too. I have just never been able to talk about it to anybody. Now I have you, and we could talk about this thing. Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fee, there are two Nates. There's Link's friend is Nate Hate 346, and then there's Sniper. Not related to each other. I don't think they know each other. Maybe they do. Who knows? Maybe
all Nates know each other.
Yeah, maybe that is where that came from.
A Nate network.
You're actually registered to it at birth. Bite Mark's question is: does your hair match your mic on purpose, or is it a happy accident?
It's a happy accident. My hair's actually, it's like a faded red, and then this is more of a hot pink. But I'll say it's on purpose. I don't know if you can tell, I'm wearing my skull.
I love your skull sweater. Yes, it's awesome.
I was like, this morning, I'm like, I'm going to wear my skull sweater for the stream.
It's perfect. I love it. It's awesome.
On theme.
Mm-hmm. Just a little sprinkle of death. Yes, Nateception. I was literally typing, do all Nates know each other? That's perfect. That's perfect. Alex says, seems kind of like the fear of flying. Just because you accept it and become more comfortable with flying doesn't mean you do not have a healthy fear of it, but keeping it in front of you can assist with curbing its negative impact on your life. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like very similar to, oh gosh, I'm totally blanking on the word. In phobia therapy, where they increase your interaction
exposure
with
therapy.
Thank you. Oh gosh, exposure therapy. It's very similar to that. Yeah. Very, theoretical idea of the more that you expose yourself to it, the less upsetting it becomes. There's actually research that supports that. People have done studies of people's like levels of fear of death over the lifespan, and there is sort of like a hump in young adulthood from like 18 to like 25, 30, where like people are really, really scared of death. And then it sort of dips down the older you get. And there were a couple of different theories of why that was. But I think a big part of it is literally just by the time that you're, 80, you have, experienced way more people, dying. You've seen twice as many movies and read 14 times as many books where characters die and all of that stuff. So it's literally just you've been exposed to death so much that you become a little bit more like, well, I'm not afraid of it, but I accept that it's coming for me. And then you have another spoonful of pudding. What a great day.
I wonder if Game of Thrones makes people less afraid of death with all the death in that.
Or more, I don't know.
Yeah. One of the two. It's pretty violent ones. Yeah.
I'm less afraid of death, but I'm more afraid of ice zombies. Uh-oh.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny that you mentioned zombies, because that legitimately is one of the reasons I don't want my body to be in a box. Like if I come back as a zombie and I'm already decomposed, then whatever. But if I come back as a zombie and I'm in a box, I'm not going to be a happy zombie.
Not a fan.
By Merck said I'm wearing my Bones Coffee Electric Unicorn shirt today, and a lady this morning complimented me on it because I like the horses and it's a little spooky.
Yes.
Perfect. Fiona said, yo, I fly all the time and I'm still terrified of it, but human brains are great at compartmentalizing. Yeah, absolutely. So I am not a super religious person, but I was raised religious and I do still consider myself Christian. I just don't go to church anymore because some of the churchy things really piss me off. But every time I fly at takeoff, I say the Lord's Prayer. And every time we're landing, I also say the Lord's Prayer. And I'm like, I'm just covering my bases here. and I do wind up having to fly quite a bit. So you're not the only one, Fee. You are not the only one. Nate, all right. So Sniper said, I think the hardest part of death is wondering why. Every time we always ask why, but unfortunately we don't get an answer in most cases right away. I spent over a year asking why my mom passed, but I am just now understanding that my mom's passing brought me and my father together. See, I like it. I like it. Alex said, and in your profession, it is more like roller coasters, right? You don't enjoy thinking about what it would be like if the roller coaster failed, but you intentionally place yourself on the ride because you enjoy it. Huh. That's interesting. Bite said, to be fair, I feel like ice zombies would be a better fear to have than death since you're less likely to actually encounter that fear. True.
Solid point.
Yes, that is a good point. Fee said, when I die, I want to do the tree pod thing, so I turn into a tree. Fee, were you here when she was talking about the mushroom shroud? Because that sounds really cool, too. That's how you get haunted forests. Hey, you know what? Sometimes forests just need to be haunted. It's fine.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it's totally fine. So what are some simple things someone can do to become more death positive in their everyday life?
I would say, bring up death and dying and grief whenever those things come up in your life. Don't, if you're like, maybe I shouldn't talk about it right now, sort of like push yourself to do it anyways. And, obviously the best thing that you can do is prepare a death plan and let several people in your family know where that death plan is, and that they have access to each other so that they can keep in contact in the case of your untimely death. I say that having not completed my death plan. I have verbally talked about it, but I have not actually written it out. So, like I said before, everybody still experiences resistance. So even though I'm talking a big game, I'm still, I'm still, sort of like working up to like actually writing it on papers and getting it signed by witnesses and stuff is like, okay, I'm maybe not quite there yet. Maybe next week. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, and that's totally fair. And, the only reason I wrote anything down is because I was going to Australia. And like I said, I have a little bit of a fear of flying. And I'm like, this is a really long flight. And I guess that provides, although not really, but more opportunity for things to go wrong. And I'll be in another country. And what happens if I get hit by a car in another country? And so at that point,
a really solid point is that if you're traveling out of the country, that is something that, you should communicate with your family and friends about, because what if your body is, what if you do die in a different place? There are extremely specific rules about corpse management that varies, even between states within the US, but definitely between different countries. And so it's one of those things where it's like, if you're traveling to a place where your typical death plan of being buried naturally without embalming won't be able to be met because you'll be far enough away that international law requires you to be embalmed in order to travel. And so it's like, okay, are you willing to compromise on the embalming, or are you willing to compromise on being buried specifically here? Or do you want to be cremated instead of embalming? And those kinds of conversations are pretty important to have, especially, like I said, if you're traveling, because you you get a lot of weird rules that nobody knows about until all of a sudden you have to make a decision and it's 3 a.m. because
Right.
they're in a different time zone and you just found out that somebody died. It was like, oh God. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There
Absolutely.
are lots of opportunities to be all like, this could be a time where I express to people important to me my wishes and values as to what happens to this old future corpse.
Mm-hmm. Future corpse. I love it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that phrase. It's great.
That's great. Yes, the mushroom shroud fee. So can you explain the mushroom shroud one more time for us?
It's a shroud. It's either comes in like a suit shape or just a typical shroud, a long sheet that you wrap around the body, but it is woven with various mushroom spores. And when you bury the body in the shroud, I think they say, just like 2 or 3 feet deep. So not super deep because you still need aeration for the mushrooms to grow, but the mushrooms will decompose the body very quickly within just a couple of weeks. And so you get almost immediately turned back into the environment completely. You are feeding animals, you are, your gases are making the trees happy. It's great.
I love that. I think that's really awesome.
I think it's really cool too.
Instead of Shroud of Turin, it'd be the Shroud of Dr. T. Awesome. I would want my death tree to be out somewhere that's like not significant because I wouldn't want people to feel tied to a place because that's where Fiona's tree is. We can't leave. Okay. All right. I wouldn't want someone to feel tied to a house because my tree's in the backyard. That's fair. If they want to move away and live their lives. Yeah. Yes, but everything in Australia does want to kill you. That's true. That is true. There was a shirt that one of the actors wore in Critical Role. Oh, okay, she's going to find that. Fee said, I want to be cut in half so my body can become mushrooms and the other half can become a tree. I love it. I feel
like that could work.
Oh, it was the We Are All Eventual Ghosts shirt.
Oh, that's a good shirt. That's a good shirt. I like that.
Yeah. Australian fun fact. Former Australian Prime Minister Bob Hawke set a world record for chugging 2.5 pints of beer in 11 seconds. He later said the record was his reason for political success. Okay. The things we learn here.
All right.
Do you have an opinion on assisted suicide?
Yes, I do. I think that, I guess I am pro assisted suicide, but it is a really, really complicated topic. And I guess a more honest answer would be yes, but, or no, and, but, yeah, it's, that one's a tough one because it gets wrapped up in legality a lot.
Yeah.
Because it comes down to who is responsible for making those kinds of decisions. I know in my own case, if I were to become terminally ill and I knew that my quality of life was just going to deteriorate and there weren't any treatments that would both, give me more time and, maintain at least an acceptable level quality of life, I wouldn't want to be asleep all the time. I wouldn't want to be, needing constant pain medication. Because that's not, for me, that doesn't fit my values as a meaningful life, as to what would fit my description of quality of life. And so I know for me in that instance, I would want the option to choose, medically assisted suicide. But I also know that it's really ethically gray. You get people who will absolutely misuse that power and anything that involves laws is there's always going to be a weird loophole that you didn't realize existed until 15 years later when technology has changed the way things work. And yeah, so that's a tough question. But my own personal feeling is I believe that, people should have control over their own bodies. So I think that that should be true through the entire lifespan, up to and including death.
Yeah. I feel like that's a fair assessment. Sorry, Yo-Yo, earlier they knocked a candle off the mantle, so I'm trying to keep her from getting up onto the and I just saw her. I saw her in my camera over here, and I'm like, whoa.
Hey.
Don't get up there. Yeah, I feel like... Oh, right. I feel like... we have some treats for kitties. Okay, hang on. Yes. I feel like assisted suicide is definitely a particularly polarizing topic.
Mm-hmm.
Good one. There we go. I feel like that's kind of a polarizing topic, and it probably depends on, for a lot of people, I think that it might depend on their life stage, what their opinion is on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always going to be true. It's what have you experienced? What have you seen in your own life? What have you seen on the media you've consumed? And then that, forms your own opinions and value sets based on that stuff. So everybody's going to be a little bit different on their, emotional reaction to that, because it is an emotionally charged subject. Yeah. So, yeah.
Most definitely. Frost, you missed the fight. It's already over. It was a draw. We have a running joke that on those little promo images that I make, it looks like a fighter kind of thing where it's, me in one corner and the other person in the other corner. But I've been here this whole time. Don't lie to me. I'm sorry. Oops. My bad. So if you could wave a magic wand of some sort and eliminate one common opinion or misconception or theory surrounding death, what would it be?
I would say the misconception I would magic wand away would be that it is not okay to talk to kids about death. And my reasoning for that is because there is a lot of research that shows, particularly with children, if you are straightforward and frank with them about death and dying, they absorb it pretty well. But if you hide it from them, that's not just a blank hole that they don't know anything about. They learn from that stuff. They pick up, they pick up every time parents are like, oh, we don't talk about that, or the voices get hushed, or, body language changes when the topic comes up. And they pick up on all of that. And basically they're learning, like, this is a terrible thing and we shouldn't talk about it. And if I have questions about it, it's going to make people upset if I ask the questions. So I can't ask any questions. Well, that's not the end of it. Their brain will fill in the gaps that they don't understand, and they will make up what, fits their child logic as to what is happening, and that can really fuck them up long term.
Yeah,
that can cause lifelong issues of dealing with anxiety and attachment issues and all sorts of things, all because people are like, well, I don't want to talk about this sad, scary thing with the kid. I want to protect them, so I'm not going to talk about it with them at all. But that ends up totally backfiring. So my feeling is obviously kids have different abilities as they develop. You're going to have a different kind of conversation about death with a 5-year-old than you would with a 9-year-old or a 16-year-old. But you should still be having those conversations. The same way as when we talked about in the beginning about sex positivity is, with a 5-year-old, you'd be talking about body parts. You'd be answering questions about what body parts are. And then as they get a little bit older, you start scaffolding off of that. And so it's the same idea with death, is you want to start, it's sort of age appropriate developmental brackets. When they're, 4, 5, 6 is when most kids start to pick up on it being a thing that happens. And then by the time they're 9, 10 is when they sort of really start to grasp what death is. They grasp that it's something that happens to everybody. It's something that can't be avoided. It's something that can have a cause, like people getting ill or an accident. It's not just something that happens like any moment of the day, which like little kids will totally believe.
Right.
Oh, that's the big one is the language we use around talking about death is very euphemistic. And with adults, that's fine. But with kids, they do not get it. And so when you say something like, oh, you know, grandpa's taking a long nap, and you mean grandpa's dead, that kid's going to be like, okay, one, grandpa's not dead, so why won't he come to my birthday party? I'm really upset that he's not here. You told me he was napping. Or two, they're going to be like, oh my God, if I nap, will I die?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Please tell me, please, I'm never napping again. And then you have a kid who's like, oh, I'm never sleeping again. And you're like, oh, what have I done? So that's one of those big things is one, just in general, talking about it so your kid feels comfortable about, you know, bringing questions to you in general. You know, they may not really care when you bring it up, but you want to sort of start that dialogue because when they do have questions about it, you want them to feel safe coming to you and like that it's okay to have those questions and not that they should be ashamed of them. But also, you know, being aware of when, as part of your own personal resistance to talking about death and dying and grief and your emotions and stuff, you know, using euphemisms can backfire. So sometimes it's like taking a beat and being like, hey, you know, it's really hard for me to talk about this, but this is what I'm feeling, and explaining to a kid. And a lot of times they pick up on stuff way easier than we give them credit for a lot of the time.
That's very true. Just look at all of the words that my 5-year-old, or now he's 6, my 6-year-old has learned that I didn't even think he heard.
They're always listening.
They are always listening. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So Fee's question is, what do you think about talking to people who are closer to death, like old people, sick people, about their own deaths?
So that one's a tough one because it can be really upsetting and invasive for some people. I know that some people will respond to that by being like, oh my God, you want me to die right now? Why would you even bring that up? And it's like, no, that's not what I meant. But I think it's pretty dependent on the person who you're talking to. It'll be dependent on their own beliefs about death and dying, their own, you know, spirituality or religiousness, how much emotional support they have from their family and community. You're going to get different sort of responses depending on the person. I know, talking to my own grandmother after my grandfather passed away, and I was talking to her, and like I'd said before, is like sometimes she's sort of resistant and she'll, you know, crack a joke and change the subject. But I found with her, the in to actually getting the conversation going was like, you know, when Papa, my grandfather, when he died, you were there. And I know that you knew what he wanted to happen, and you knew what he needed, and you were there. But when you die, you're not going to be there to tell me what to do. And so I need you to tell me now, because otherwise I'm going to be really, really scared that I'm going to mess it up and I'm going to let you down. And so it would help me feel better if you would talk about this thing, parentheses, that you're clearly avoiding. Like, come on. But you don't have to say that hard. Just sort of frame it that way, where it's like, hey, look, and you can even say that sort of thing. It's like, I don't really know how to bring this up. I'm afraid it's going to make you uncomfortable, but it's really important to me that we have this conversation. Yeah. And, you know, leave them space to be like, no. But, you know, if you can be, you know, gently pushy about it and being like, it's really important to me that I know what you want, because I really love you and I really care about you and I don't want to let you down. And I'm afraid that I will if you don't tell me. So I need you to tell me. Yeah. And just being open in that way, I think really helps people be all like, well, gosh, this is morbid. I don't want to talk about my own death, but you look sad, so I guess I'll do it for you.
Well, and kind of, I feel like phrasing it in a way where it's like you're doing me a favor by communicating your wishes to me. I think that a lot of people, especially grandparents, would be more receptive to talking about it than it's like, you can't just say, all right, Grandma, what do you want to have happen when you die? But if you say, Grandma, I want to know what you want to have happen so that I can not feel like I've messed something up and not done what you wanted because I didn't know what you wanted. I think that they're probably more receptive to it, to it that way.
Yeah, I've also found if you come in with like, hey, here's what I want to happen to my corpse, what about you? Sometimes that's just sort of surprising enough that people will actually genuinely answer it.
I love it. Little trickery there. It's perfect.
Sort of surprise them enough to be like, well, gosh, I guess I would want to be cremated. And you're like, I got you. Cremated. Okay, writing it down.
Yeah. Well, and it is kind of important to write it down too, right? If you're having these conversations, because I know I've had this conversation with my dad more than once, and I didn't write it down, and I can't remember what he said. and I've had it a couple times. Once because I was going to Australia and I was communicating my wishes, and it did. He was just like, "Oh, well, now that you're talking about it, this is what I want to have happen to me." And I wrote mine down, but I don't know that he wrote his down. He may have put it in all of their paperwork, but and then again, when my great grandfather died, 3 years ago. I don't remember when that was. But when great grandpa died, we were all sitting around and we were talking about it again. And I know that he said it again, but I didn't write it down, so I don't remember. So we're going to have to have another conversation with him where I'm like, speak into the phone.
Siri, make a note.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a really, really good point, is writing it down, because verbal communication, obviously our memories are not perfect, but also, it's kind of uncomfortable. Maybe our brains are sort of protecting us by being like, we're not going to remember that. We're just going to forget that conversation and leave it alone into the depths with you.
Right.
So having it written down, and like I said before, having it in a location that other people know about. Mm-hmm. Because it's not going to do anybody any good if you've stashed your death plan binder in the back of your closet and they don't find it until, 3 months after you've died, because now they're cleaning out the closet. And then they discovered that they did everything wrong, and their grief is made 1,000 times worse because now they feel super guilty on top of that. Yes, so having a location where stuff is, not just your death plan, as to what you want to happen to your body and what kind of, post-death services you want, but also any ongoing things that you pay for. Like, I know people on here are Twitch subscribers. Those have like monthly they incur payments monthly. So having a list of things that you are paying for so people can track that down and cancel them. Having a list of passwords so people can get into your accounts. That's something with my friend Hannah that we're struggling with. We don't have the password to her laptop, so we can't get in and access a lot of her writing and stuff, which we want access to. And so stuff like that. Is having a location where that information can be found, and having not just one person who knows about that, having ideally several different people in your life. So like a direct family member, a close friend, maybe somebody you've worked with for a long time who is like very organized, like have them be the person who has everybody else's phone number. So when they get the word that you've died, they know exactly who to call so that everybody knows, instead of doing the dance of like, well, did you tell Steve? Is like, no, I told Dave. Well, does Dave have Steve's number? I don't think Dave and Steve have ever met. They're brothers. They live together. It's fine. And sort of that kind of stuff is like, you don't want to have to figure out the logistics of making sure you're not leaving out somebody by telling them, this life-changing news. You don't want to feel bad. It's like, oh, I totally forgot to call you, and then you had to hear from, a stranger at the Kmart or something. It's like, okay, you want people who are going to be able to handle that kind of stuff. And you want a couple of people, because obviously you don't know when you're going to die. So you want to make sure that there's backup in case one of them dies before you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, something I learned recently, is that LastPass, which I wasn't using before and now I'm using, but I still haven't figured it all out yet. But LastPass, which helps you remember passwords. And if you ever need to change all your passwords, it's like a click of a button to change them all. They apparently have a feature where if you die, you can give all your passwords to a designated person through LastPass. So that's just another thing like to include, because I only know about that because Bytemark mentioned it when I said, oh, I need to update all my passwords in my will, because my will has a list of accounts and passwords and everything. And I'm like, I've changed a lot since I made that in 2014. I probably ought to update that. And she said, wait, you don't use a password manager? And first of all, that was apparently a problem. And now I do. but now I have
cool.
that.
I didn't know LastPass had that functionality. That's really good. That's one of those things I think about a lot of the time is, we spend so much time online and there's so much digital stuff that is ours. And it's like after our death, what happens to it and who has access to it and who can control it. And that kind of stuff is like, it's very interesting. You can sort of, see when software has not thought about that at all, where they're like, they've avoided the thought of death so much that they're like, oh, we have nothing in place for that. It's like, oops. Yeah, we should probably fix that.
Yeah. Okay, so Bytemark, I'm gonna get to your question in just a second. You don't have to use a password manager. They help a lot with keeping your passwords unique. Look, when I said I didn't use one, you were like, what? Or that's how it felt. That's how it felt on my end. More of do this for me now so I can not worry about about in the future, rather than, hey, you're gonna die soon, right? What do you want to do about that? Yes.
I mean, if you're talking to somebody who's got a really silly sense of humor, like, go for it. I've definitely done that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I assume you know who you're talking to, and you've probably got a fairly good idea of how to angle the conversation in a way that doesn't make them too uncomfortable. But like I said before, the easiest thing to do is really frame it in the way it's like, this isn't about you. This is about me and me wanting to reduce my anxiety in the future.
Absolutely.
And I think that framework makes it a lot easier for people to deal with that.
Yeah. So Bytemark's question is, how do I work up the courage to talk to my kid about an upcoming death? She's experienced loss before, but I selfishly worry about the impact her response will have on me. And I think that's a perfectly fair fear.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, that is very normal, because it's an emotional thing. And when you're a parent, you are not only responsible for your own emotional well-being, you're responsible for your kids too. And so that is very complicated. How old is your daughter?
She's well, I guess I better not answer that in case she doesn't want to share.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I can tell you, but I'll wait for her to say.
Okay, yeah, that's smart. It's sort of dependent on
13. There you go.
Okay, so 13 is a pretty solid age to start talking about this stuff. They have the cognitive ability to sort of grasp death as a concept. But it is really tough to talk about that stuff, especially to your kid, especially when you know it's going to hurt them and you don't want to hurt them, and it hurts you to see them hurt. But I think being honest about it that way will help strengthen your relationship to your child. It'll help them feel like they can trust you more, because you're not hiding things from them, even from a mission, that you're being straight up like, hey, I'm not okay. And being honest in that way, I know from being a kid, is really meaningful to have somebody who you care about and protects you, have them being open and honest with you in that way. It can be a little scary to see your parent cry. I know everybody has that, like, that's not right. You're not supposed to do, I'm the crier. And then you make me feel better. What is going on here? But I think, again, it's one of those things where if you're open and honest about it, it really strengthens that bond between you, because that vulnerability is so genuine. And with a 13-year-old, I think starting with that kind of conversation is like, hey, I want to talk to you about something important. I've been avoiding this conversation with you because I don't want to hurt you. And I know that this is a painful conversation. And also it hurts me to see you hurt. And so that's why I've been avoiding it. And saying stuff like that sort of shows them, especially as they become teenagers, the idea of like taking into consideration other people's feelings and responses is part of how we make decisions. And so sometimes we make bad decisions because we're being, more about our own feelings, or we make bad decisions because we're being more about somebody else's feelings instead of our own feelings. And sort of using grief and death talk as a bigger life talk of like, we like to avoid the sad stuff and the scary stuff and the stuff that we don't have answers for. And that's part of life. And that's not something you're ever really going to grow out of. I know there's something about like when you're a teenager and looking up to your parents and you're like, they know, they've got it all together, until you're an older teen and you're like, wow, you don't know anything at all.
Right.
But there is that ongoing relationship of sharing that kind of stuff is throughout your whole life. It's not just when you're a little baby. It's not just when you're a teenager. It's not just when you're an adult with adult parents. It's the whole experience. And being open about being scared to talk about something is really powerful. And I think in this case, wanting to be open about like, I'm trying to figure out if it's a better idea to avoid it until the death happens and then we'll deal with it then, or if I should try and prepare you for it because maybe that'll help you feel better. And that's something that you can ask. You can ask your daughter that. Is that something, do you feel safer when you have time to prepare, when you have time to ask questions? Or would you prefer to not think about it until it's time and then we can talk about it? Because people are different. And some people are like, I need you to go over every single detail of what's happening right now. Otherwise, I'm going to freak out about it. And then there are people who are like, if you tell me a detail, I'm going to lose it. So I'm going to need you to just know details, just the loose figure form, no details. And being aware of the kind of person you're talking to and sort of shifting your message to fit your audience, so to speak.
Yeah. Alex said also, no matter how she reacts initially, she will constantly look back at it, and what she'll remember more than what you told her is how you were when you told her, and that can make her stronger in many ways. Yeah.
Yes, that's another big aspect as far as kids go, is kids will learn what is acceptable reactions from your behaviors. And so if you completely shut down, don't talk about it, don't address it, ignore it, they're going to think that that's the normal way to handle it. And as they grow up, hopefully they'll figure out pretty soon that it's like, okay, there are other ways to handle this. That's not the only option. But, some people will live their whole lives being like upset and angry and scared and all bundled up inside and like, well, I'm never allowed to talk about these feelings because that's taboo. That's not allowed. People won't like me if I bring it up. And it's like, no. You got to let some of it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely a really good point, is less so what her reaction to it. It's going to be, she'll see your reaction to it. And so being honest with yourself and being honest with her is like long-term the best thing you can do for anybody.
And I don't feel like you're saying, be strong on the outside kind of thing. Like, I think it's okay to still show that vulnerability, and
you should absolutely show that. I mean, I would, hey, this is hard for me to have this conversation because I'm uncomfortable and scared and sad about it. But I think it's important enough. I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
And just being like, what I have found particularly comforting in my own grief recently is a lot of times when there's a death, people are afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so they don't say anything. And that ends up being way worse. And so having people come up to me and hear the news or whatever and saying, gosh, I really don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. Actually made me feel so much better, because what do you say? What do you say to a sudden surprising death? What do you say to a long drawn out illness death? It's like, it's terrible. Death is heartbreaking and loss, and the only way we get through it is with each other and supporting each other and feeling less alone and afraid. And so being open about that feeling of being like, look, I'm scared to have this conversation. I've got like weird grumble guts going on right now. Please don't laugh. But if you could just like, I want to do it. This is important to me. Let's have this conversation. And I think that people really respond well to that.
Yeah. Yeah. With the previous loss, we had no warning. So that was pretty much decided for us. This one, cancer's worst. Cancer is the worst. Mm-hmm. Yes. Watching someone die is hard. It is. It really is. It's hard, especially, with a loved one who you've been really close with growing up and everything. Like, it's really hard. Strength is not a shell. Strength is more often being able to share vulnerabilities. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, Dr. D, fuck cancer. Absolutely. Fuck cancer. Yeah, it's bullshit.
Yeah, I think that's really true. There is a lot of strength in being vulnerable, in being like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm still here and I still want to be here with you. And I still, like, we can be confused and scared and unknown together, at least.
Yeah. Mama's vulnerability is that she has trouble saying vulnerabilities, so I'm going to make her read it again. Rude. Also, I like that the captioner let me say fuck cancer, but then it bleeped out bullshit. Like, it's got the B and all the stars, but saying fuck cancer. Maybe captioner feels the same way. You know what? I like it.
Captioner's like, fuck cancer is its own phrase. And
yeah. Right. We're fine with that.
That's always okay.
Cancer is, in my opinion, one of the hardest things a family or group can face. Yes, the captioner is anti-cancer. I like it. Also, I will just go back to something that Alex said, because you mentioned that you couldn't get into your friend's laptop. He is a tech guru, and he's also my brother-in-law. So, like, I actually know him. But he said he can help you with getting into the laptop if you just need to retrieve files. You can create an Ubuntu boot up thumb drive as if you're going to install Ubuntu, whatever that is. And during the install process, it asks if you want to retain the files. Ask a nerdy friend for help with this. But I've used this a few times for completely legit reasons. So if you have questions about that or can't find someone to help,
we've got some tech savvy people on it, so it's okay. But that's sort of the thing, is there's not any real rush on it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you haven't quite put everything into writing. I've been kind of considering putting a more robust death blueprint. Like I said, I have the things in my will and related paperwork, but I haven't really done it yet. Is there a resource that you would go to kind of get a good example of that, of a kind of personal death blueprint?
So typically what I would say is, typically what I would say is Google searching your, your state or your country, and then like advanced directive or will or both, and have that be sort of your start, because it is very different depending on where you live.
That's true.
But I also, one of the books I read recently, which one was that one? That one was Advice for Future Corpses.
I love it.
It's by Sally Tisdale, Tisdale. And she has a whole index in the back of the book that goes over, like, not every possible thing you might want on your death blueprint, but the very basics, the medical side, which is the advance directive, and then the will side is what you want done with your stuff afterwards. But then it has spaces for what kind of memorials you want. It has like a line section for like, what music do you want to be played as they lower your coffin into the ground, or what Spotify playlist do you want us to play during your memorial service and stuff like that. It can get really specific, but that's a pretty good resource right there. But yeah, like I said, I've been sort of not totally on top of it yet. So maybe that's something that you and I could do together. We can be accountability buddies.
I would love that.
On doing our death blueprints.
I would love that. That would be great.
Let's do that.
She has the pin out. Yes. I mean, I've already written down, so I'm up to 4 things so far from today, but I have pages and pages of things that I've written down to figure out later. Accountability buddies. There you go. The state you should fear Mama most is when she opens Microsoft Excel. Look, I love my spreadsheets, okay? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what you want from me. Anything but Sarah McLachlan's Angel. Look, I'm going to cry just talking about that because it makes me think of the puppies.
The puppies.
and all of those save for $1 a day. You can save, and they show all the emaciated dogs and cats that you can imagine, and it's just so sad.
It's too sad.
So sad. Okay, so Alex's question is, do you have someone that you talk to about tough times you go through? And if so, why? Oh my God. Seriously? I can't speak. All right. Do you have someone you talk to about tough times you go through? And if so, why are they the ones you lean on? And what do you expect from them in that role for those that have been voluntold for that role? That's it. I like the voluntold piece.
Nice. Yeah. So I have a handful of friends that are really good emotional support people. And I also go to therapy. I have a professional person whose job is to just hold my bullshit while I sift through it. And I think I would say the biggest trait that I look for in somebody to be emotionally vulnerable with during tough times is people who, one, are open and honest about their own vulnerabilities, that it's a reciprocal kind of thing. And also that, how do I want to phrase this? Also people who are, I guess, okay with dealing with discomfort and are okay with dealing with not having answers to things, and just sort of being like, I guess the easiest way to describe that is people who are okay and comfortable saying, I don't know. And I find that to be really comforting personally, because I'm an anxious person. So I spend a lot of time going over like, what if this, what if that, what if this, and having somebody sort of reflect that back to me with like, oh, it's sometimes like extremely calming and makes me feel safe. And it's like, it's okay that we don't have answers sometimes. That's all right. And I'm not alone in that. And that feels really good.
Yeah. I think that's anytime you find someone who's willing to say, I don't know, instead of just trying to make something up, I feel like that is more truth than someone who just always has an answer. Yeah. Quite a bit. Rick roll the shit out of my funeral goers. I love it. A whole bunch of times, at least 4 or 5, enough that it stops being funny, then it becomes funny again. All right. So by Mark, what I'm hearing is, I'm not going to put you in a coffin for everyone to walk by at the end of the service, but I'm going to have a coffin filled with copies of the movie Up so that they realize that we are never going to give you up. We never gave you up until you died. Or the requirement to get into your funeral is a copy of Up.
You have to give
And then
Up.
we're never going to give it back.
Oh my gosh.
That's great. I like listening. Fiona says, I like listening to you talk when you're thinking about how to say what you want to say because I do the same thing. And it makes me feel validated. That's perfect.
Oh, yay.
So could you share some tips to prepare for end of life and death? Are there basics everyone should have covered regardless of age or health?
I would say covering the very basics would be, getting people that you would want to be in charge of those kinds of decisions and tell them that. And then, decide ideally what you would like, best death case scenario, everything is perfect, all of your wishes come true. Explain that to somebody. Write it down somewhere so that there is a reference point. You might not get everything that you want. They might not get everything that they want, but that's a starting point, which helps reduce fear for people. So at least there's something that I can direct to. I would also say figuring out for in the case of advanced directive medical wise, in the case of if you're in a terrible accident and there's brain death or organ donation, feeding tubes, resuscitation, all of that stuff is hopefully something that you will spend some time thinking about yourself as to what would be acceptable for you. And then again, expressing that to somebody else and writing it down. That is one of those things that is really uncomfortable to think about because we don't like to think about that high level of trauma to our bodies. But it is something that's really important because typically you will find in a medical framework, doctors will push towards more life-saving treatments. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily a good quality of life. So a lot of times people will be like, keep me alive as long as possible. But then when you actually find out what the process is of feeding tubes, people will be like, actually, I'm changing my mind. I would like to be kept alive as long as possible until a feeding tube is on the table. And then I don't want to do a feeding tube. It's uncomfortable to think about that kind of stuff. But that is the sort of nitty gritty stuff that somebody will have to be making quick decisions on that's doesn't have as much time to sort of think and ponder and decide okay, well, what do I think that you would value in this case so I can make your wishes be fulfilled? Is you have 15 minutes right now to decide if we're pulling this plug or not, make a decision. And it's oh, okay. So in that case, having something that people already know or know where to find the answer to is really, really important. Like we mentioned before, the idea of if you are traveling out of state or out of country, having a plan in that case of what ideally you would like done is a good thing to have. And then I guess what I touched on before again is choosing people to choose your team, your future corpse team, and then make sure that they know each other or have each other's contact information, because that's one of those things before is you want to make sure that the people who need to know are told, because finding out later and in a uncomfortable or really jarring way, in Starbucks line is oh gosh, I'm so sorry for your loss, and you're what loss? And it's oh, you didn't hear that Terry died? And you're Terry? I love Terry. Yeah, and so that kind of stuff is making sure that people know who to call and who needs to be the reference point. Is okay, I know that you are very social. You've got everybody's numbers. You've got everybody's Facebook pages. That's going to be the thing I need you to be in charge of. this person's going to be in charge of medical decisions, but you two need to be in contact with each other so that you can communicate those things to all of the other people. And having those sort of connections set up beforehand. It doesn't need to be a full-on, like, an exchange of cards, like, you are the corpse bearer. But it can be like, send out an email to your family and important friends, and just have an email be like, look, here's what I want. Here's what's important to me. I know this is awkward. Sorry, I'm sending this in an email, but I didn't want you to forget. I want there to be a written proof of it. And here's a contact list of all of the people you might potentially need to contact. And here's a list of all of the, credit cards I have right now or whatever, and just have that in a whole email and just send it out to everybody. And then you don't even have to think about it anymore. Maybe they don't reply. They're just like, oh my God, why did you email me this again? I'm like, actually, it's really cool because then you can update it. You have like a running email chain of like, changed my mind. They put out a new mushroom shroud and it's even sexier than the last one. So I'm updating to that one.
Dr. D has the psychedelic mushroom shroud now. We're going to that one now.
It's finally available. I'm changing my death plan. Yeah, exactly. So that kind of stuff. I think, it's something that we have to really sort of make ourselves do. But I do think it is valuable time spent preparing both emotionally inside to have those kinds of thoughts about, what you care about and what's important to you in the face of your inevitable mortality. But also it brings you closer to other people. It helps reduce their future anxiety of making sure your wishes are known and all of that stuff. It's just, it is hard, but like many hard things, it is worth doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I would add to that, because when I sent my info to my dad when I was going to Australia, like I called him first. It's like, hey, I'm gonna send you my will and stuff. Not because like I have some sort of diagnosis that I haven't told you about.
Yeah.
But because I'm traveling.
I'm just like in the subject, just like I'm not currently dying right now, other than the like philosophical way.
Right.
Come on.
Like I feel like I have certain people that I could just email it to and they'd be like, all right, whatever. Cool. And then there's people like parents who probably should get a phone call first to say nothing is wrong, but I'm sending you an email.
I'm just gonna send you an email. It's it's emotional, but it's important, and I just wanted to warn you.
Yes. Not currently in some sort of active state of dying. Just FYI. Yes, by Mark, you're one of those. I would just send you an email and you'd be like, oh, all right, sure, whatever. Mushroom Shroud 2.0 now with psychoactive properties. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. Slay said, in the event of my death from unnatural causes, the theme song to Friends must be played. I need a good song for my natural death, though. Need to think on it. Well, there you go. Fee's an organ donor.
Nice.
Does California put that on your driver's license?
Yes,
Texas does. Yeah,
you have to opt into it. It used to be opt out, and then they switched it to opt in, which I'm a little disappointed. But that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. Slay said a good point on advanced directives is that your family might want to keep you alive as long as possible at great financial and emotional cost. You can make that decision for them and save them so much emotional pain. That's a personal choice. I mean, if you feel like they would go to financial emotional cost, and you want to prevent that, then definitely.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that the laws regarding advanced directives and stuff like that are not, super straightforward. And so there are instances in which you can write on your advanced directive, I do not want to be resuscitated at all. But in case of an emergency, the normal procedure is to resuscitate. And so, there's nothing you can really do about that. Right. But the point is to have a general guideline that, all of the physicians can reference, that all of people who have legal power over you can reference. There's a reference point. It may not 100% happen the way we want it to, but I mean, it's life. Nothing does. Yeah. But it's good to have a plan. Even if it ends up not being the plan, it's good to have a little roadmap.
Yeah. That's to me, that's like birth plans. Like, it's not going to go how you put it in your birth plan. It's fine. I mean, mine never did, but it's good to have it written down. It's good to have it accessible. It's good that your partner knows about it. It's good that whoever's going to be in the room with you knows about it. So you can do as much as possible to make it that way. As with death, like if you have a heart attack in Kmart and someone performs CPR when you didn't want to be resuscitated, they have no way of knowing that. However, if you go into the hospital after having a heart attack and you've communicated everything and then your heart stops, then the doctors can say, okay, well, the medical directive is not to resuscitate. There's always a chance that it won't work out the way that you want it to. Yep. And that's totally fair. Alex says, I have a button I have to push every 2 days. If I don't push it, then there's a large group of people that will receive a text message with instructions, which results in a marching band playing outside my funeral service the song This Too Shall Pass.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's good. Fee says, speaking of finding out about death, this year my grandpa died on my birthday, and I had a weird feeling for the whole day, so I didn't answer any of my mom's calls or voicemails, and my boyfriend told me at the end of the day, and it was weird, but it ended up being better that way. Yeah. Yeah, she definitely has that kind of demeanor, Fee, for sure. Full response to the email, K. You better put an O before that K. That is one of the, there had better be an O. Okay. Is not that hard.
K, period.
There's a guy that's serving a life sentence, and they revived him from temp death? What is temp death? Temporary
death?
Despite his DNR, so now he's trying to make the legal case that he's already served his life sentence because he died.
I read that. Oh, yeah, that's wild. Yeah. That's like the Game of Thrones Jon Snow being like, I died. You can't keep me here now.
Yep. True.
Maybe that's what they'll call the law, the Jon Snow law.
Yeah, there you go. A court in Iowa found that a murderer who was revived is either still alive, in which case he must remain in prison, or he is actually dead, in which case this appeal is moot. Wow. That's special. So is there an overall well-being strategy, either related to death positivity or not related to death positivity, that you would recommend to anyone? Anyone with or without any sort of underlying anything, just generally speaking?
If you have the resources to go to therapy, I recommend it. There's always a chance you get a bad therapist or a therapist that you personally don't get along with. Therapists are people. There are always going to be people you don't mesh with. That's fine. But if you have the resources to go and spend time looking for somebody you really get along with, that is such an important relationship to have support that's just based like on you and not a wider social group between your family and friends and partners and pets and children and all that stuff. It's just about you. And that is a very valuable thing to have. Additionally, I try and practice mindfulness as much as I can. I think for me, it fits in well with the idea of death positivity because, the idea being by sort of talking about the inevitable death that's coming, I can just sort of put it out there and it's there, and then I can move on to something else instead of it being a constant underlying anxiety is, yeah. It's sort of trailed off there, but yeah, it's just,
That is okay. Well, and I meant to say this earlier, but I really liked what you said about a therapist being the one who holds your bullshit while you sort through it. I think that is my favorite way that anyone has described therapy ever.
It's I think of like, when you're at like a big dinner and you'll have like a big bowl of mashed potatoes or salad or whatever, and you hold the bowl for the person next to you to serve themselves. It's kind of like that. Sometimes you need somebody to hold that bowl for you while you do the thing that you need to do. It's right. Like I need a bowl holder.
Mm-hmm. I love it. That's perfect. And then if you could change one thing about the mental health field or people's views of mental health professionals and educators, what would it be?
Oh gosh. I mean, I just wish that we could have more conversations like this all the time. Like, I really appreciate what you're doing. It's just making it a part of your weekly schedule to have conversations about mental health and well-being. And that's just great, man. Like, it's totally normalizing. It makes it like this is a part of life. Death is a part of life. And when we include it in our holistic experience, it makes that experience more meaningful and more empowering and more valuable. And I think that that's what people want generally.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need somebody else to be all like, hey, I know you're not going to bring up talking about death. I'm going to bring it up, and we're going to have this conversation, and it's going to be amazing, and you're going to think about it for like the next 3 weeks, and it's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, as long as there are people willing to come on here and talk to me, I will continue talking.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of it, right? It's like we just got to keep talking, keep engaging about it, because this is it. This is life.
Yep, it is.
Yeah.
Well, I will open up the floor to any other questions. If the community has any other Q&A that they want to ask here of our guests today, and then while they are doing that, I will just give you the floor for anything you want to promote or say, or anything you feel like we didn't talk about that you want to talk about in more detail. I'll just kind of open it up while we wait and see if anybody has any more questions.
Well, I mentioned Caitlin Doty earlier. She has the Ask a Mortician YouTube page. She's also one of the founders of the Order of the Good Death, which is a nonprofit organization working on death positivity, basically. But she has the YouTube show, which is great. Highly recommend that. There's all sorts of like really cool, informative stuff. She started out more focused on talking specifically about typical questions that people have for morticians. What is the process of embalming? What is the process of cremation? That sort of stuff. And then she sort of expanded into like death myths and tall tales that have spread throughout time. And then more recently, she's done a lot of cool like history of famous corpses. And those are really cute. She does like little short videos. They're usually about 5 minutes long. They're really fun. I recommend those. But she has 3 books out that I really love. The first one is called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Tales from the Crematory.
Yeah.
Crematory. And that one is sort of a more autobiographical story about how she got into being a mortician and everything, and sort of finding the idea of death positivity and that sort of stuff. And then her second book is called From Here to Eternity, and that one is looking at death rituals in a bunch of different cultures, which was really cool.
I love that.
Yeah, that one's my favorite. It also has some very beautiful drawings inside of the book. There's some good illustrations in there. And then her most recent book that came out a couple months ago is called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? And that one it's basically a book where she has taken questions about death that have come specifically from children. So anywhere from like 5 to 13, 14-year-olds and their questions about death. So, one of the common ones is, will my cat eat my eyeballs? But then there's also stuff where she goes over like theoretically what would happen if you were an astronaut on a spacewalk and you died in space. Like what would happen to your body then? And those sort of questions, which are really cool. And that one also has some cool illustrations in it. But those 3 are really great. I love those books. I highly recommend them. There's also a video game called A Mortician's Tale, which is loosely based off of Caitlin Doty's first book, The Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And that is a maybe like a 2.5 hour game where you simulate being a mortician, and you get to perform typical duties of a mortician, and it's really cool. It's a very easy game for anybody to play, and it's got some great music in it too. But yeah, it's a cool one.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah,
I like it. Okay, so we did get another question. So Alex asked, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Oh gosh, a lot of things. I probably a veterinarian. That's what I hung on to for the longest because I love animals. I wanted to be a veterinarian probably until like, I don't know, mid high school, when I realized that becoming a veterinarian is becoming a doctor, but for like a bajillion different types of animals instead of just one animal. And then also you don't get as much respect or pay. And I was like, well, never mind. That sounds awful.
Fair.
Yeah, I think
fair.
that was it for a long time. And then when I first started my bachelor's degree, I intended on going into therapy and clinical psychology. But along the way, I got sidetracked by by research, which is now what I really love. And yeah. I would still be a veterinarian if somebody let me.
If somebody would let me, yes, absolutely.
just let me hang out here. It'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to be a veterinarian, and then I found out how much it cost.
Yep.
So,
oops.
I went to community college instead, and then got a business and marketing degree.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's fine. Fee said, no joke. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a wine taster. You're in the right place.
Wow. Come
over. Like I've always offered all of my white wine to you, and the offer still stands. Come over and you can have the white wine. By Mark said, I thought about being a vet or doctor when I was young, but I decided I couldn't be a vet because I would feel awful if I lost a patient, and I couldn't be a doctor because then I would have to deal with too many people. Yep.
Yep.
True. Frost, I want to be a MommaFoxFire when I grow up. Don't do it. Oh. It's too complicated. Kevin is thinking about being a traveling nurse, so maybe we'll end up in Texas someday, and I will save the white wine. I'm telling you. It's still over there. I just don't drink it. I drink red wine. I just, they still sent it. They stopped sending it now. MommaFoxFire never grew up. Valid. My doctor dream went away when I realized I'd have to see things, horrid things. There you go. Well, thank you so much for being here and for being willing to talk about death positivity and being willing to take questions and answers. I know that you've definitely opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I wrote down a whole page of things here to go and look into later. And I am happy to be your accountability buddy for a death blueprint. So I'm looking forward to putting that together. I need to revisit anyway and kind of put some more thought to that, especially with the invention of a mushroom shroud since 2014. Like, that wasn't a thing back then, and I love it. It's fantastic. Yeah. But thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been an absolute blast. You are lovely to chat with, and your community asks really fun questions, and I had a really great time doing this.
Yep, absolutely. By Mark said this was really informative and fun. Yes, accountability is accountability buddy is copyrighted. TM. Okay, got it. I got it. Mama needs to be buried in a vineyard. I love it. I love it. That's good. That is good.
A very complex flavor.
A hint of sarcasm, healthy dose of cynicism, along with some blackberry undertones. Fee said, thank you for being here. Frost said, okay, now fight to the death. The winner gets a high five from me personally. Frost, I will fight for you. That was an absolutely lovely conversation to have about a typically taboo subject. My goal with this podcast is to hold relatable conversations in a supportive, non-judgmental environment, and I really feel like this one encapsulates that pretty well. Until next time, I hope you are able to own your own story, love yourself, and thrive as you become more mentally stable, emotionally healthy, and physically well with each passing day. And don't forget that the only normal people are the ones you don't know very well yet. Until next time.